Good morning. Today we are going to read Chapter 5 of Sarah Plain and Tall by Patricia McLaughlin. The sheep made Sarah smile. She sank her fingers into their thick, coarse wool. She talked to them, running with the lambs, letting them suck on her fingers. She named them after her favorite aunts, Harriet, Mattie, and Lou. She lay down in the fields beside them and sang, "Sumer is a coomin' in." Her voice drifting over the meadow grasses carried by the wind. She cried when we found a lamb that had died, and she shouted and shook her fist at the turkey buzzards that came from nowhere to eat it. She would not let Caleb or me come near, and that night Papa went with a shovel to bury the sheep and a lantern to bring Sarah back. She sat on the porch alone. Nick crept up to lean against her knees. After dinner, Sarah drew pictures to send home to Maine. She began a charcoal drawing of the fields, rolling like the sea rolled. She drew a sheep whose ears were too big, and she drew a windmill. "The windmill was my first word, said Caleb. "Papa told me so." "Mine was flower," I said. "What was yours, Sarah?" "Dune," said Sarah. "Dune?" Caleb looked up. "In Maine," said Sarah, "there are rock cliffs that rise up at the edge of the sea, and there are hills covered with pine and spruce trees green with needles. But William and I found a sand dune, all our own. It was soft and sparkling with bits of mica, and when we were little, we would slide down the dune into the water." Caleb looked out the window. "We have no dunes here," he said. Papa stood up. "Yes, we do," he said, and he took the lantern and went out the door to the barn. "We do?" Caleb called after him. He ran ahead, Sarah and I following, the dogs close behind. Next to the barn was Papa's mound of hay for bedding, nearly half as tall as the barn, covered with canvas to keep the rain from rotting it. Papa carried the wooden ladder from the barn and he leaned it up against the hay. "There," he smiled at Sarah. "Our dune." Sarah was quiet. The dogs looked up at her, waiting. Seal brushed up against her legs, her tail in the air. Caleb reached over and took her hand. "It looks high up," he said. "Are you scared, Sarah?" "Scared? Scared?" exclaimed Sarah. "You bet I'm not scared." She climbed up the ladder and Nick began to bark. She climbed to the very top of the hay and sat, looking down at us. Above, the stars were coming out. Papa piled a bed of loose hay below with his pitchfork. The light of the lantern made his eyes shine when he smiled up at Sarah. "Fine?" said Papa. "Fine," said Sarah. And she lifted her arms up over her head and slid down, down, down into the soft hay. And she lay laughing as the dogs rolled beside her. "Was it a good dune?" called Caleb. "Yes," said Sarah. "It's a fine dune." Caleb and I climbed up and we slid down. Sarah did it 3 more times. And at last, Papa slid down too as the sky grew darker and the stars blinked like fireflies. We were covered with hay and dust and we sneezed. In the kitchen, Caleb and I washed in the big wooden tub, and Sarah drew more pictures to send to William. One was of Papa, his hair curly and full of hay. She drew Caleb sliding down the hay with his arms like Sarah's over his head, and then she drew a picture of me. In the tub, my hair long, straight, and wet, she looked at her drawing of the fields for a very long time. "Something is missing," she told Caleb. "Something." And she put it away. "Dear William," Sarah read to us by lantern light that night. "Sliding down our dune of hay is almost as fine as sliding down the dunes into the sea." Caleb smiled at me across the table. He said nothing, but his mouth formed the words that I heard too. Our dune. Boys and girls, I want you to think about why that's important to Caleb and Anna, that Sarah called the dune our dune. Why do you think that is? Okay, bye for now. Chapter 6 tomorrow. Feel free to answer the questions and draw that scene of them sliding down the dune on the attachment that I sent you guys. Bye for now. Stay tuned. Miss you.